Lila wiped her hands on her apron as she stepped out of the small cafe kitchen. The smell of freshly baked bread and coffee still clung to her clothes, but she didn't mind. The cafe wasn't fancy, and the customers were mostly locals who came in for a quiet place to read or chat. It was a small world, but it was her world, and the piano in the corner was her favorite spot. Every afternoon, after the lunch rush, she would sit at the piano and let her fingers wander over the keys. It was her escape. People would come and go, sometimes pausing to listen, sometimes not noticing at all. But Lila didn't play for them. She played for herself. Each note carried a part of her story, a little piece of her heart and dreams. Music was the only way she felt fully free. That morning, the cafe had been busy. Orders came in fast, and Lila moved quickly between the kitchen and the counter, trying to keep up. By the time the rush ended, she was tired, but when she sat at the piano, the fatigue melted away. She played softly at first, letting her fingers remember the melodies she loved most. She closed her eyes and felt the music flow through her, imagining herself on a bigger stage, in front of people who really understood and appreciated every note. As she played, the bell above the door jingled, and a man in a neat suit walked in. He looked out of place among the regulars sipping coffee and reading newspapers. He walked straight to the counter and spoke to the owner, then looked around the cafe, clearly searching for something or someone. Lila kept playing, curious but careful not to draw attention to herself. The man's gaze finally landed on her, and for a moment, their eyes met. He smiled politely and nodded before turning back to the counter. After he left, the cafe returned to its usual rhythm. Lila thought little of it, assuming he was just another visitor, another person who noticed her playing but would soon forget. Later that day, after closing the cafe, Lila found an envelope slipped under the door. It was unusual thick, cream-colored, and without a return address. Inside, there was a letter written in neat handwriting. It began politely, praising her piano skills, mentioning that someone influential had noticed her performances at the cafe. The letter went on to invite her to perform at a gala in the city, a high-profile event filled with important people. It suggested that her talent would be perfect for the occasion and that she should consider the opportunity seriously. Lila read the letter several times, her heart beating faster each time. She was surprised and hesitant at the same time. A gala? Important people? It sounded exciting but also intimidating. She had never played anywhere outside the cafe. The thought of performing in front of strangers, especially in such a fancy setting, made her palms sweat. But at the same time, it was a chance she had always dreamed of, even if she hadn't known it. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. The next few days were filled with preparation. Lila practiced constantly, going over old pieces and trying new ones. She even created a small notebook with notes about the pieces she wanted to play, writing down feelings and emotions to convey with each melody. She wanted to make sure that when she played, it wasn't just notes. She wanted the audience to feel her story, the struggles and joys she poured into her music. Her friends at the cafe noticed her distraction. They teased her gently, asking what was on her mind so often. Lila smiled but didn't tell them everything. Some things felt too big to explain. She just said she had an exciting opportunity, and that was enough. Inside, though, she felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She knew the world outside the cafe was very different, and she wasn't sure she was ready. Yet, a small voice inside told her that this was exactly what she needed. The day of the gala arrived. Lila had chosen a simple but elegant dress. Nothing too flashy, just enough to feel confident. She carried her sheet music carefully, double-checking that everything was in order. The city streets buzzed with activity as she traveled to the venue. Skyscrapers and bright lights made her feel small and nervous, but she reminded herself that music was her strength. She had practiced, she was prepared, and she could do this. When she arrived, the hall was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the floors shone as if polished by magic. Guests in evening gowns and sharp suits mingled, laughing and chatting. Lila felt a wave of nerves as she stepped inside, clutching her music. She was led backstage, where other performers were preparing. Some were already tuning instruments, others rehearsing quietly. It was a world she had never experienced, and for a moment, she felt out of place. A kind assistant noticed her discomfort and smiled. "Don't worry, you'll do great. Just focus on your music." Lila nodded, grateful for the encouragement. She took a deep breath and went over her pieces one more time in her head. Each note, each pause, each melody became a friend she could rely on. She reminded herself that the music belonged to her, not to the crowd, and that gave her courage. Soon it was her turn. The host introduced her with a polite, formal tone, mentioning her talent and the unique charm of someone who had risen from humble beginnings. Lila felt the eyes of dozens of guests on her as she approached the grand piano. She smiled briefly to herself, a tiny smirk that only she knew the meaning of. This was her moment to shine, to let her music speak louder than words. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and she closed her eyes for a brief second, letting the world fade away. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost tentative, as if testing the room. Slowly, the melody grew stronger, richer, and more confident. The guests turned to listen, some intrigued, some surprised. Whispers spread quietly among the crowd, as people realized this was no ordinary performance. Lila poured herself into the music, feeling every emotion with each note, imagining the story she wanted to tell them. Time seemed to slow as she continued, the sound of the piano filling the grand hall. Her fingers moved with precision, guided by instinct and passion. The music spoke of hope, of struggle, of quiet triumphs. Lila felt a sense of freedom she had never known, and for a moment, the audience disappeared. There was only her, the piano, and the story they were about to share together. When she finished the first piece, the room was silent. Not out of rudeness, but because the guests were captivated, holding their breath, unable to move or speak. Lila opened her eyes, a small smile on her lips. She had felt it, the connection, the magic of music bridging the gap between her world and theirs. This was the first step, and she knew there were more melodies to play, more moments to share. Backstage, she exhaled, feeling both relief and excitement. She had done it, and the thought gave her confidence for the next piece. Each performance was a chance to prove to herself, not just to the audience, that her music mattered. Lila knew the journey ahead would be full of challenges, but at that moment, nothing could shake her. The music was hers, and she was ready to share it with the world. The gala hall buzzed with quiet conversations as Lila stepped off the stage for a brief moment. Her heart was still racing from the first piece, but she felt a growing sense of confidence. The small smirk she had given herself earlier returned, a secret acknowledgement that she was holding her own among an audience far more intimidating than she had ever imagined. She walked toward the side of the room, holding her sheet music carefully, her mind replaying the notes she had just played. Guests were turning to each other, some speaking in low, astonished tones. Many had expected a simple, polite performance from the young pianist, but what they had heard was something far more powerful. It wasn't just technical skill. It was emotion, expression, a story told through music. Some nodded appreciatively, others whispered names of famous pianists as if comparing, but everyone agreed on one thing. This girl had talent. Backstage, Lila noticed a few performers preparing for their acts, glancing at her curiously. She smiled politely at them, but inside, she felt a strange mixture of nervousness and excitement. The hall felt larger than life, and the people seemed even more important up close. Yet, she reminded herself that music was universal, and talent spoke louder than appearances. She needed to focus on her next pieces and not let the grandeur of the event overwhelm her. An assistant approached her with a kind smile. "You're doing wonderfully. The audience is captivated. You just need to keep being yourself." Lila nodded, appreciating the words. She had been preparing for moments like this for years, even if she hadn't realized it. Her practice, her dedication, and the quiet hours spent at the cafe piano had all led to this point. She took a deep breath, centering herself for the next part of the performance. As she returned to the piano, she noticed some skeptical faces in the crowd. There were people dressed in sharp suits and elegant dresses who seemed to be evaluating her every move, their eyes critical yet curious. A small smile tugged at her lips. She wasn't there to impress them. She was there to share her music. The challenge of winning over the doubters only made her more determined. Her hands hovered over the keys for a brief moment, feeling the smooth surface under her fingertips. Then, with a confident exhale, she began again. The music started softly, gentle and melodic, drawing the audience in. She chose pieces that told a story, not just notes on a page, but a journey through emotions. Every chord carried meaning, and every pause was intentional, letting the audience absorb the depth of the music. Slowly, the room began to change. Conversations faded as people turned their attention fully to her. Some leaned forward in their seats, mesmerized by the way the music seemed to float and weave around them. Others closed their eyes, letting the melodies wash over them. Lila felt the energy of the audience, their reactions flowing into her fingertips, creating a dialogue without words. She was no longer just playing notes. She was communicating directly with the hearts of those listening. The gala was filled with influential people, but Lila noticed something unexpected. Even the critics, those who had been silently judging her from the start, were beginning to soften. A few exchanged impressed glances, clearly surprised by her skill and the emotion she conveyed. Lila's smirk returned, subtle and knowing. She didn't need their approval, but it was satisfying to see doubt replaced by admiration. Halfway through her set, Lila decided to take a risk. She began a piece that was unfamiliar, a challenging composition she had been practicing secretly for months. It was a gamble, but she felt ready. Her fingers moved with precision, each note carefully measured, yet flowing naturally. The complexity of the piece drew gasps and murmurs from the audience. The music demanded attention, and everyone was compelled to listen. Lila felt her heartbeat sync with the rhythm of the hall, a shared pulse between performer and listeners. As she continued, she noticed small smiles and nods throughout the crowd. Even those who initially seemed uninterested were now leaning forward, caught in the web of her performance. The music carried them through a journey of emotions, moments of tension, relief, joy, and contemplation. Lila felt herself becoming part of the room, not as a visitor or performer, but as a storyteller weaving an invisible thread connecting everyone present. Time seemed to stretch as she played. Each piece followed naturally from the last, and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she watched the audience respond. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about the connection. The way someone's eyes softened, the way a hand rested lightly on a table in awe, the subtle catch of breath when a particularly moving chord resonated. They all told her that she was succeeding. Between pieces, there were brief moments of silence, and Lila used them to center herself. She allowed herself a quiet smile, a private acknowledgement of her courage. Stepping into a world so different from her cafe had been daunting, but she had not only survived, she had thrived. The music had carried her through, and she had trusted in herself when doubt tried to creep in. By the time she reached the final piece of her set, the atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. The initial skepticism and polite curiosity had melted away, replaced by genuine admiration and anticipation. Guests were fully engaged, waiting to see how she would end her performance. Lila felt a rush of emotion, nervousness mixed with exhilaration. This final piece was her statement, her declaration that she belonged here, that her music mattered. She began softly, allowing the notes to float like a gentle breeze through the room. Gradually, the melody grew, stronger and more expressive, capturing every listener's attention. Lila poured every ounce of emotion into her playing, letting the story unfold naturally. The room seemed to hold its breath, hanging on every note. Even the whispers had stopped. Everyone was fully present, sharing this moment with her. As the final notes lingered, there was a pause. A silence so profound that it felt like the entire hall was holding itself still, savoring what had just been experienced. Lila lifted her hands from the keys and allowed herself a moment to breathe. The silence was powerful, almost magical, filled with awe and unspoken appreciation. It was a testament to the connection she had created, the journey she had taken the audience on, and the courage she had shown in stepping into an unfamiliar world. Slowly, the applause began. At first, a few scattered claps, hesitant but genuine. Then it grew, stronger and more enthusiastic, until the entire room was clapping, cheering, and some even rising to their feet. Lila's heart swelled with a mix of relief, pride, and joy. She had done it. She had stepped into a world that once felt impossible and had made her mark through talent, dedication, and courage. Backstage, she was met with smiles and praise from the event organizers and other performers. Some offered handshakes, others simply nodded with admiration. Lila felt a sense of belonging she had never imagined possible. The music had been her voice, and it had spoken louder than words ever could. As she collected her things and prepared to leave, a few guests approached, offering invitations to future events, collaborations, and even mentorship. Lila realized that this night was not just a single performance. It was a door opening to countless opportunities. She felt gratitude, excitement, and a renewed determination to continue sharing her music with the world. Her journey was only beginning, and she was ready to embrace it fully, knowing that courage, practice, and a true love for her art had brought her this far. After the applause died down, Lila stepped back from the piano, her fingers tingling from the effort. She felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration, her heart still racing with the thrill of performing in front of such a prestigious crowd. She had never imagined that one evening could change so much, and yet here she was, at the center of attention, having captured the hearts of people she didn't even know. Backstage, she leaned against the wall for a moment, taking slow, deep breaths. The other performers were finishing their sets, and the energy in the room was electric. People were moving quickly, preparing for the next part of the gala, but Lila felt a sense of calm. Her mind replayed the music she had just played, remembering the emotion she had poured into each note. She realized that every hour of practice, every quiet afternoon at the cafe, had led to this moment. It wasn't luck. It was dedication and belief in herself. An event organizer approached her with a clipboard, smiling warmly. "Everyone is talking about your performance." They were stunned. "You have something special, and it's rare to see that kind of connection in a first performance." Lila nodded, slightly embarrassed by the praise, but also proud. It felt good to be recognized. Yet she reminded herself that the music mattered more than the applause. It was the feeling she left behind in the audience that truly counted. Lila walked toward a small seating area near the side of the hall. The gala was continuing, but she felt a little out of place among the elegantly dressed guests, many of whom were important figures in business, arts, and media. She wasn't used to this world, and for a moment, the grandeur made her nervous. She clutched her sheet music, the familiar weight giving her comfort, and took a sip of water, steadying herself. As she looked around, she noticed some guests whispering, pointing subtly in her direction. Some faces showed admiration, others curiosity, and a few still seemed skeptical. Lila smiled to herself. She didn't need to impress everyone. She only needed to stay true to her music. The reactions of the crowd were like waves in the ocean, some close, some far, but all part of the journey she had begun. She felt a quiet confidence growing inside her. She was capable of more than she had imagined. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice. A woman in an elegant gown approached, introducing herself as a mentor in the music world. "I saw your performance," she said, her eyes kind. "You have a gift, but what impressed me most was your courage. You have something rare, a way to make people feel every note. Would you like to discuss opportunities for your music?" Lila's eyes widened slightly. This was more than she expected, a real chance to grow beyond the cafe and the gala. She nodded eagerly, feeling a rush of excitement and nervous anticipation. After their brief conversation, Lila felt a renewed sense of purpose. She walked back to the piano not to perform, but to observe. The next performer was taking the stage, and she realized that this world was full of talent, each person bringing their own story to life. She watched carefully, noticing how the audience responded, learning silently from the subtle ways others connected with listeners. It was a valuable lesson, one she could carry forward into her own journey. The gala continued, filled with music, speeches, and laughter. Lila observed quietly, blending into the background while feeling fully present. She noticed that her nervousness from earlier had transformed into a quiet focus. She was no longer overwhelmed by the grandeur. Instead, she felt inspired. Each interaction, each performance she witnessed, became part of her understanding of this new world. Later in the evening, she was approached by a small group of guests who had been particularly captivated by her performance. They asked questions about her background, how she had learned to play, and what inspired her music. Lila answered honestly, sharing pieces of her life and the joy she found in the piano. The conversation flowed naturally, and she realized that people were not just interested in talent. They were interested in authenticity. Her story, her dedication, and her love for music resonated more than anything else. As the gala began to wind down, Lila found a quiet corner to reflect. The evening had been intense, full of moments she would never forget. She thought about her journey from the small cafe to the grand hall, remembering every note, every practice session, and every moment of self-doubt she had overcome. She felt grateful for the opportunity and proud of the courage she had shown. Music had always been her refuge, and now it had become her voice in a world that felt both intimidating and exciting. A few guests approached to offer invitations to future events, private recitals, and collaborations. Lila listened carefully, thanking each person sincerely. She realized that the connections she made tonight were not just about recognition. They were doors to new experiences and growth. She felt a sense of responsibility, a quiet determination to honor her music and the people who believed in her. This night was only the beginning of a larger journey. Before leaving the gala, she returned to the piano one last time. It was empty now, the lights dimmed, and the hall quiet except for her own footsteps. She sat down and let her fingers wander over the keys, playing softly for herself. The melodies were gentle, reflective, filled with the emotions of the night. She didn't need an audience now. The music was enough. It was a private moment, a way to process everything she had experienced and prepare for what lay ahead. When she finally stood, she felt a sense of closure and anticipation at the same time. She had proven to herself that she could rise to challenges, that her talent and dedication mattered. The gala had been a test, a stepping stone, and she had met it with courage and authenticity. Lila walked out of the hall with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue her journey, knowing that the world was larger than her cafe, and her music had the power to touch lives far beyond what she had imagined. The night air was cool as she stepped outside, the city lights twinkling around her. Lila took a deep breath, letting the experience settle in her heart. She felt alive, inspired, and ready to embrace every opportunity that came her way. The gala had not only shown her the power of her music, but also the importance of belief in herself. She smiled quietly, knowing that this was just the first of many nights where her music would speak louder than words, creating connections and leaving lasting impressions. Lila's journey was only beginning, and she was ready to take the next steps with courage, passion, and an unwavering love for the piano. The next morning, Lila woke up feeling a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. The gala had ended, but its effects were still with her. She remembered every note, every expression on the faces of the audience, and the way the room had fallen silent at the end of her performance. It was a memory she knew she would carry for the rest of her life. Sitting by her window with a cup of tea, she reflected on how much had changed in just one night. She had stepped out of her familiar world and found herself in a place that had once seemed unreachable, and she had thrived. The day passed quickly. Lila practiced at the piano, experimenting with new pieces and refining the ones she had performed at the gala. She wanted to make sure that every note she played reflected the emotion she felt inside. Music had always been her way of communicating, and now she understood its power in a new way. It was no longer just her personal refuge. It was a bridge to others, a way to connect, inspire, and leave an impact. By the afternoon, she received a call from one of the gala organizers. They wanted to discuss an opportunity for her to perform at a prestigious music festival. Lila felt her heart race. The offer was incredible, but it also meant more pressure, traveling to unfamiliar places, and performing in front of even larger audiences. She paused, thinking carefully. She realized that growth required stepping out of comfort zones, and this was another chance to rise. With a quiet determination, she accepted. In the days that followed, Lila's life began to feel busier, more complex, yet exciting. She received emails from people who had attended the gala, praising her performance and expressing interest in future collaborations. She even received an invitation from a well-known pianist who offered to mentor her. Lila felt grateful but also slightly overwhelmed. This world was vibrant and full of possibilities, and she was slowly learning how to navigate it. Every message, every opportunity, reminded her that her music had value and that people wanted to hear it. Lila spent her mornings practicing, refining her technique, and experimenting with new melodies. Afternoons were often spent responding to emails and preparing for upcoming performances. She learned quickly that talent alone was not enough. Preparation, communication, and confidence were equally important. The challenges were new, but they were invigorating, pushing her to improve and adapt. She found herself growing not only as a pianist but also as a person, learning patience, resilience, and the courage to face the unknown. One afternoon, Lila received an invitation to a private gathering at a renowned music academy. The event promised to bring together musicians, composers, and critics from around the world. Nervous but excited, she accepted. It was another step into a world that felt intimidating, yet she was determined to embrace it. She packed her sheet music carefully and rehearsed on the way, reminding herself that each note carried her story, her emotions, and her unique voice. When she arrived at the academy, the grandeur of the building struck her. The hallways were lined with portraits of famous musicians, and the air seemed to hum with the energy of talent and creativity. She was guided to a practice room, where other musicians were already warming up. Lila felt a brief moment of doubt as she observed their skill and confidence. But then she reminded herself of the night at the gala. She had already proven that she could hold her own. She took a deep breath, sat at the piano, and began to play. The familiar feeling of connection with the keys and the music washed over her, calming her nerves. The evening of the gathering arrived, and Lila performed in front of an audience that included some of the most respected figures in the music world. She felt the same nervous energy she had felt at the gala, but this time it was accompanied by confidence. She played each piece with intention, letting the emotion flow naturally. The audience responded with subtle nods, attentive listening, and soft applause. Lila knew that her music was being heard and felt, and that realization gave her strength. After her performance, a few guests approached her with warm smiles and encouraging words. They complimented her technique, her emotion, and her ability to captivate an audience. One guest, a composer she had admired for years, offered to meet with her privately to discuss collaboration opportunities. Lila felt a mix of surprise and excitement. She had never imagined that such opportunities would come so quickly, yet she realized that her dedication and authenticity had opened doors that once seemed impossible. As the evening continued, Lila mingled with other musicians and guests, learning from their experiences and sharing her own journey. She realized that the world of music was not just about performance. It was about connection, collaboration, and growth. She listened carefully, absorbed advice, and asked questions, eager to learn. Every interaction reminded her that talent was only part of the journey. Humility, curiosity, and persistence were just as important. By the time the event ended, Lila felt inspired and motivated. She had met people who shared her passion, learned new techniques, and discovered opportunities she hadn't anticipated. The experience reinforced her belief that taking risks and stepping into unfamiliar territory was essential for growth. She left the academy feeling both exhausted and exhilarated, knowing that she had taken another significant step in her journey as a musician. Back home, Lila reflected on the whirlwind of experiences. From the quiet cafe to the gala and now the music academy, her life had transformed in ways she never imagined. She realized that her music had the power to connect with people on a deep level, to inspire, and to leave a lasting impact. She felt grateful for every challenge, every opportunity, and every moment of self-discovery. In the following weeks, Lila balanced practice, performances, and meetings with mentors and collaborators. She faced challenges, including managing nerves, preparing for complex pieces, and navigating new social environments. But each challenge strengthened her confidence and honed her skills. She learned to trust her instincts, embrace her unique style, and communicate through her music with authenticity. One evening, after a long day of rehearsals, Lila sat at the piano and reflected on how far she had come. She thought about the moments of doubt, the small victories, and the connections she had made along the way. She realized that her journey was not just about reaching prestigious stages or gaining recognition. It was about growth, resilience, and the courage to follow her passion. Each note she played carried her story, her emotions, and her dedication, and she understood that this was the true reward of her efforts. Lila smiled as she finished her practice for the day. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and anticipation for the future. The gala had been the beginning of a new chapter, and every step she took after that had reinforced her belief in herself and her music. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, but she was ready to face them with courage, passion, and the unwavering love she had for the piano. Her journey was unfolding beautifully, and she was determined to embrace every moment, knowing that her music had the power to touch hearts and change lives. Lila awoke early, the soft morning light filtering through her window, bringing with it a quiet excitement she could feel in her chest. Today was another performance, a private recital at a small but prestigious venue in the city. The invitation had come as a surprise, yet it was clear that her music was beginning to capture the attention of people who mattered in ways she had never imagined. She sat on the edge of her bed, quietly reflecting on how far she had come. From the small cafe where she had first practiced to performing at grand galas, her life had transformed in just a few weeks. She smiled to herself, feeling grateful but also aware that each new opportunity carried its own challenge. After a light breakfast, she gathered her sheet music and carefully packed it into her bag. Lila had learned that preparation was just as important as talent. Each piece she planned to perform today had been chosen not only for its beauty but also for the emotion it carried. She wanted the audience to experience her music, not just hear it. As she traveled to the venue, her thoughts wandered through the melodies she would play. Each note had its own memory, its own story, and she was ready to share them. Arriving at the venue, Lila felt a familiar flutter of nerves. The room was elegant, with warm lighting and an intimate stage that brought performers close to the audience. She was greeted politely by the organizers, who assured her that everything was ready for her recital. Lila nodded, giving a small smile, and made her way to the piano. Sitting down, she felt the smooth keys beneath her fingers, grounding her, reminding her that no matter how grand the setting, the music was hers to command. The audience began to arrive, filling the seats with quiet anticipation. Lila noticed faces both familiar and new, some who had attended the gala, others who had come specifically to hear her after hearing praise from previous performances. She felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The responsibility of performing well was heavy, yet she also knew that her music had power. It could move hearts, create connections, and inspire those who listened. She took a deep breath and let that thought center her. The recital began, and Lila's fingers moved across the keys with precision and grace. Each note carried emotion, flowing from her heart to the ears of the audience. She started softly, allowing the room to settle into her melodies, then gradually built each piece to its full expression. The audience responded instinctively, leaning forward, closing their eyes, and letting themselves be carried by the music. Lila felt the same connection she had felt at the gala, but this time it was more intimate. She could see the individual reactions of listeners, their faces softening, their breaths catching, their hands resting lightly on the edges of chairs as they absorbed every sound. Midway through the recital, Lila chose a piece that she had been particularly nervous about. It was complex, with intricate passages and unexpected changes in rhythm. She had practiced it countless times, but performing it in front of a live audience was always a test of skill and confidence. As her fingers danced across the keys, she focused entirely on the story within the music. The room seemed to disappear around her, leaving only the sound of the piano and the emotions she poured into each chord. The audience was captivated, and for a moment, the world outside the recital hall ceased to exist. There was only the music and the shared experience it created. As the piece reached its climax, the room was silent, hanging on every note. Lila felt a surge of exhilaration. She had pushed through her nerves, embraced the challenge, and created something that resonated deeply with those listening. When the final note faded, there was a moment of stillness so profound that it felt like the audience was collectively holding its breath. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the room, growing louder and more enthusiastic. Lila allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The music had spoken for her, and the audience had listened. After the performance, several audience members approached her with kind words and encouragement. Some shared personal stories of how her music had moved them, how it had reminded them of their own struggles and joys. Others offered invitations to collaborate, to perform at additional events, or to record pieces together. Lila listened, grateful and humbled. She realized that her music was not just her own. It had a life of its own, capable of touching lives in ways she had never imagined. Each interaction reinforced her belief that pursuing her passion was not only worthwhile but essential. As the evening continued, Lila found herself speaking with a small group of experienced musicians who shared their insights and advice. She listened carefully, absorbing their words while reflecting on her own journey. Each conversation reminded her that growth required humility and openness. Talent opened doors, but learning and connection sustained a career. She felt inspired to continue improving, to explore new pieces, and to deepen her understanding of the music she loved so much. After the recital ended and the audience had left, Lila stayed behind, sitting at the piano alone in the quiet room. She played softly for herself, letting her fingers move freely over the keys. The melodies were gentle and reflective, carrying the emotions of the day, the excitement, the nervousness, the triumph, and the gratitude. It was a private moment, a way to honor her own growth and the experiences that had brought her here. Music had always been her refuge, but now it was also a bridge to the wider world, a way to connect and communicate without words. Packing up her sheet music, Lila reflected on the whirlwind of recent weeks. From the cafe to the gala, and now to this recital, she had traveled through experiences that challenged and inspired her. She realized that the journey was as important as the destination. Each performance, each interaction, and each moment of self-discovery shaped her as a musician and as a person. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing that her dedication and authenticity had led to these opportunities. As she stepped out of the venue into the cool night air, Lila felt a renewed sense of purpose. She walked through the quiet city streets, carrying the energy of the recital with her. The applause, the smiles, and the words of encouragement echoed in her mind, reinforcing her belief in the power of her music. She understood that the path ahead would continue to be filled with challenges and opportunities, but she felt ready. Every step she had taken, every note she had played, had prepared her for this journey. Back at home, Lila sat at her piano one last time for the day, allowing the music to flow naturally. She reflected on the people she had met, the experiences she had gained, and the growth she had achieved. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that her music had the power to reach others in meaningful ways. The recital had been another milestone, another reminder that courage, dedication, and authenticity could create extraordinary moments. As she finally closed the piano, Lila felt a quiet peace. She had faced nerves, embraced challenges, and shared her passion with others. She understood that each performance was not just about showing skill but about conveying emotion and connecting with the hearts of listeners. Her journey was ongoing, but she felt confident and inspired. Music had brought her this far, and she knew it would continue to guide her, opening doors, shaping experiences, and touching lives in ways she had never imagined. The final performance that awaited Lila was unlike any she had experienced so far. It was a charity concert organized in a large auditorium, filled with people from all walks of life, from local supporters to important figures in the arts. Lila felt a mixture of excitement and nerves as she arrived early to the venue. The air was thick with anticipation, and she could hear the hum of conversation and the soft tuning of other instruments. She carried her sheet music and personal notes with care, feeling the weight of the opportunity before her. Walking backstage, Lila noticed the bustle of preparation. Musicians adjusted their instruments, stagehands moved quietly, and the organizers coordinated last-minute details. Lila took a moment to herself, closing her eyes and feeling the piano under her fingertips as she mentally rehearsed her pieces. She reminded herself that she had faced challenges before and had succeeded. Her confidence had grown through every performance, every interaction, and every new experience. The audience today was important, but her music was what mattered most. It was her voice, her story, and her chance to connect with people through emotion. When it was her turn, Lila took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The lights shone warmly, illuminating the grand piano in the center. She could see the audience before her, a mix of familiar faces and new ones, all waiting to hear what she had prepared. She smiled slightly, a small gesture that no one noticed, but it was her acknowledgement that she was ready. Sitting down at the piano, she allowed her fingers to hover over the keys, feeling their smoothness and the promise of the music to come. The first notes were soft and deliberate, allowing the room to settle into the melodies. Lila played with intention, letting the music breathe and flow naturally. She felt the audience leaning in, listening intently, and she felt a connection stronger than ever. Every chord carried emotion, and every pause created a space for the listeners to absorb the story within the music. The performance was not just a demonstration of skill. It was a conversation, a shared journey between her and those who had come to experience it. Midway through her set, Lila played a piece that was both complex and deeply personal. It was a composition she had written herself, inspired by her journey from the cafe to these grand stages. Each note reflected her struggles, her courage, and her dreams. As she played, she could feel the emotions of the audience shifting, their expressions softening, their eyes closing to fully absorb the music. Lila's heart swelled with the knowledge that her story was being heard, not through words, but through the power of her melodies. The hall seemed to become part of the music, the acoustics amplifying each note, allowing it to resonate deeply. Lila played with focus and freedom, balancing precision with expression. She had learned over countless performances that music was not just about technique. It was about honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to let others feel what she felt. The audience responded instinctively, their energy feeding back into her performance, creating a loop of shared emotion and connection. As she approached the final piece, Lila allowed herself a moment of reflection. This performance was more than a concert. It was a culmination of everything she had experienced so far. She remembered the nights spent practicing alone in the cafe, the first applause at the gala, the encouragement from mentors, and the small victories that had brought her here. Each note she played carried a part of her history, her growth, and her dedication to music. She felt grateful and determined, knowing that every challenge she had faced had prepared her for this moment. The last piece began softly, almost like a whisper, drawing the audience in. Gradually, the music grew, sweeping across the hall with emotion and intensity. Lila's fingers danced across the keys, conveying hope, resilience, and joy. The audience was fully captivated, listening intently, their expressions reflecting the journey of the music. Some closed their eyes, some smiled, and some appeared moved to quiet tears. Lila felt the power of her music, the invisible connection between her and everyone present, and she played with complete surrender to the emotions she wanted to share. As the final chord lingered, there was a profound silence. The audience held their breath, processing the beauty and emotion of what they had just experienced. Lila sat still for a moment, allowing the silence to exist, letting the impact of the music settle in the room. Then, slowly, applause began, growing into a thunderous ovation. Lila allowed herself a smile, her heart full of gratitude and fulfillment. She had not only played music but had shared her story, her journey, and her soul with the world. Backstage, organizers and fellow musicians approached her, praising her performance and expressing admiration for the emotional depth and technical skill she had displayed. Some offered future opportunities, collaborations, and invitations to other prestigious events. Lila listened, humbled and grateful. She realized that her music had become more than just a personal passion. It was now a tool for connection, inspiration, and influence. Each note she played had the power to touch hearts, and she understood the responsibility and privilege that came with it. Later, in a quiet moment alone, Lila sat at the piano, playing softly for herself. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the small cafe to the gala, the music academy, and now this final recital. She thought about the people she had met, the lessons she had learned, and the growth she had achieved. Music had been her refuge, her voice, and her guide. It had carried her through challenges, opened doors, and connected her to people she never would have met otherwise. Lila realized that the journey was far from over. Each performance, each new opportunity, was a chance to grow, learn, and inspire others. She felt a deep sense of purpose and clarity, understanding that her music was not just about her own fulfillment, but about the impact she could have on those who listened. She was ready to continue this path, embracing every challenge and celebrating every success along the way. As she closed the piano for the night, Lila felt a quiet peace and immense satisfaction. She had faced fears, taken risks, and shared her music with sincerity and courage. She knew that the journey ahead would continue to bring challenges, opportunities, and growth, but she felt ready. Her music had the power to reach people, to move them, and to create lasting connections. With every performance, she would continue to share her story, touch hearts, and inspire those who listened. Lila's journey, though marked by extraordinary moments, was ultimately about passion, dedication, and the courage to follow her dreams wherever they might lead.